What's up, boopers? If you haven't heard yet, we just got a Q&A from the Blizzard developers over at the Classic World of Warcraft subreddit where they answered some really great questions. And some of the answers the devs gave have you guys asking me questions about some of my previous videos. So I thought I would address it all by going over this AMA together with you guys and talking about what some of these answers mean. Now this video isn't really going to be scripted or edited, it's just a discussion video format, so hopefully it turns out okay, but whew, let's get started. So I'll be going over the AMA through Classic Wowhead. Squishay has a post that very neatly summarized the AMA with all the major talking points, making it easy for us to go over each of the questions. In total, there were 7 members of the Classic WoW dev team answering these questions, which explains why we got such a great variety of questions thoroughly answered. But I'll be starting right from the top and we'll skip over any of the mundane questions that don't really give us anything revolutionary. So right off the bat, we get a question about reset day. They say they're not changing it, which means it's typically Tuesday. Nothing new there. But the second question immediately piques my interest. This question is talking about 10-player dungeon caps. There was a bug brought up on Reddit a few days ago about the original caps of most of the dungeons being at 10 players up until TBC, with the exception of Blackrock Depths, Skoloman, Stratholme, and Dire Maul being capped at 5 players. Now, a lot of you guys have been asking me, does this affect dungeon grinding? Short answer, not really. So while it would make dungeon clearing go much faster and you would get experience pretty efficiently as well, you would be running into a lot of issues of the dungeon cap limit. You would have much less loot and gold to be spread between those members, and 5 players have enough of an easy time clearing the dungeon. As it is, there's not really any reason to push in 5 more players into your dungeon clears, be it in Dead Mines, RFC, things like that. It's a little redundant at that point. However, in the upper dungeons, we're talking about Maraudon, Zul'Farrak, and LBRS because BRD here is capped at 5. Bringing in more players at those points could be an interesting strategy. Now, I noticed a lot of guilds, as I mentioned in my last video I just uploaded, a lot of guilds have been forming these kind of dungeon grind groups inside the guild. With the ability to go into these dungeons with 10 players, it could solve a potential issue where some of the groups start to break apart in the higher levels. For example, you got 2 5-man groups both grinding Zul'Farrak. Maybe 2 guys fall asleep in one group, another guy can't play so much in the other group. Now you've got 7 players, an uneven number. You can't get both groups in their own 5-mans, but if you crunch them together, 7 players in Zul'Farrak, still pretty effective experience per hour. You're not going to have any trouble or threat of wiping with that many players. Still decently quick experience, and nobody's getting left behind. So it's a very interesting strategy that people can start employing. Obviously, it means you have to skip out on BRD, which is a great experience dungeon, or just resort to 5-man grinding it, or try and skip it all together and go to LBRS, which is a little risky unless you're like 53, 54. But it's definitely a strategy that opens up with this new information. It also makes it more effective in terms of loot. You can get more separate classes in that need certain loot off of certain bosses, so if one piece of loot drops, it's more likely that someone is able to use it. So it would be great at gearing up your members pretty fast before they're even level 60. If you get an LBRS group with one of every class in it, I know a lot of guilds also plan to break off the mages or other classes around level 55 to go farm Hydraxi and Waterlord rep and Silithus, which would break apart some groups. Those groups could also be squished together with the other melee grind groups to continue grinding in groups of like 8 or 7 in LBRS. Because LBRS and Zul'Farrak and Maraudon are pretty high density, that you're not really hitting a risk of clearing them so fast that grouping into big raids makes it ineffective. But again, I don't think it's going to be worth making big raids of 10 players to start grinding SM and things like that. SM's already going really fast, so there's not really any need to put more people in those groups. But yeah, definitely an interesting thing to think about for your group if you're having trouble filling 5-man parties together because some people are losing some members. Next, the question honor calculations. It's not going to require a reset, it's just going to calculate while the servers are still up. Nothing really major there. Debuff priority, it says there was a system in place in vanilla and they have replicated it, which is good to hear, I think, depending on what the priority system is. There's no information on what the priority system is, but I'm assuming it prioritizes powerful debuffs like Sunder Armor, prevents them from being overwritten by weaker debuffs. In the example here, Deep Wounds or Rend, possibly. You don't want your Ignite getting knocked off by a Rend or a Hamstring or something like that. I'm assuming that the debuff priority system protects against that, which is good, because when there's a limited amount of debuffs, you don't want to screw that up, especially knocking off a high stacked Ignite. That's going to cause you a lot of trouble in some of the later fights. Transferring gold between live and classic. Now this question, they don't really address it. They say that there's no direct way of doing it, but as many people pointed out, it's very easy to sell something in classic for a WoW token in BFA to keep your account and subscription live. I'm pretty sure people will try to pull this off. Obviously, there's a lot of risk involved with such a trade of somebody stealing your token or somebody stealing your loot in Classic, but undoubtedly people will try and do this. It's much safer than I think going to third parties to buy it, but I don't know. RMTs exists in all of these games, whether it's legal or not. The next question here though is about holidays. Now this is pretty interesting. They're saying all the holidays are going to be out from the start. At first glance this doesn't seem that big of a deal, but holiday buffs that they bring with them, like trick-or-treat candies or the Valentine's Day buffs or the Christmas buffs and things like that, they're pretty big, and being out right out the gate, it means you can stockpile them for when the big content releases come. Obviously having a Christmas buff coming in November or December is not going to really affect phase 1 or phase 2 that much, because those phases are pretty easy as it is. But it will definitely have an effect if you can stockpile them preemptively before something like AQ40 or Naxxramas comes out, or use them for PvP depending on how hardcore you want to get. Another thing that interests me about this is back in Vanilla WoW, when we got these Christmas presents and things like that, there were different achievements like the Brewfest Stein Cup and the... I can't remember what it was. It was like a car for the Winter Veil events that were labeled for 2004, 2006, whatever the year that they came out and as such. Now that we're having these same events coming in 2019, 2020, it'd be interesting to see what kind of new presents they offer us. If they're going to go with the no changes route and just give everybody the same sort of stuff that the other players got back in Vanilla, the 2005 rewards for Christmas, Winter Veil stuff, or they're going to come up with some new stuff. That'd be interesting to see. Obviously, it's not going to affect gameplay too much. It's just a cool little tidbit that I'm curious what they'll do with. Reporting next, they talk about gold sellers and cheaters. They don't mention much about in-game reporting, just that they have a lot of detection tools to protect their terms of service, so hopefully we don't need to deal with spammers too much or anything like that. The next question they talk about is loot. The question here is, in phase 1, will raid only drop items added to the Molten Core before patch 1.3? In phase 2, will it only drop items added to Molten Core in patch 1.1? Basically, they're asking if loot in these phases are going to be added in as the phases drop, or if the loot is just going to be in there from the get-go. Now the answer here is a little disappointing. They're basically saying that all the loot drop tables are just going to be the way they are in 1.112. That means we're not going to have really progressive drop tables, which is kind of good, kind of bad. It means there's going to be a lot of good gear dropping right out the gate. Like, for example, the Rock Boss in BRD dropping those healing items that he don't originally drop. They do say that the relics and the Librams and stuff like that are only going to drop when they were originally added and won't drop out the gate. Like, they're only going to start appearing in phase 5, which means the drop tables on mobs that do drop those items are going to be altered so that they don't affect the percentages and the weights on those drop tables too much. And they sum it up basically as you'd expect, that those loot drop tables are going to be pretty much from phase 1 to phase 6 exactly the same. A little disappointing, but I mean, I guess they don't have the exact data to work with, and I don't think it's going to affect gameplay too much. Most of the people are just going to steamroll all the content anyway. Now the next section about loot, again, is very interesting for the leveling guide. It talks about Thorium Point, Silithus, and Jinta Allure, as well as later phase quests. So what they are saying in this answer is that we will have Thorium Point in at launch, and Jinta Allure in at launch, which has a very nice hit trinket for Horde. Thorium Point as a quest hub is very easy to do, so you're definitely going to want to weave that into your leveling path. There's like 6 kill quests, and for 5-man dungeon grind groups, you definitely want to go in and get kill quests that are all bunched together like that. They'll go super fast. Takes about 10 minutes to get a ton of experience, so I'm going to have to add that in to the guide. That is not currently in there. I left it out because it was still a little bit ambiguous if they were going to put Thorium Point in or not, but this is great news. It's just really great to have Thorium Brotherhood so people can start working on their rep already to get that fire resist gear. Cenarian Hole is not going to be in until phase 5. It's pretty much expected. I didn't expect it to be in. I don't think anybody was expecting that to be in the first place. All in all, it doesn't change that much having Thorium Point in early. It's just more experience. Nothing that we really needed. It's great for the solo leveling guide though that I made for Warriors, because it's kind of dependent on Thorium Point. Without it, you're stuck grinding a larger portion of the higher 40s, lower 50s section. So having that in, great news. Now the next question here though, after phase 6, big question, a lot of people have been discussing this. Should they go to BC or should they expand a new content? They say here that they have prepared or are preparing Classic so that it's in a state that it could easily transition into the Burning Crusade. But they have not settled on going to BC yet. They say they're waiting to follow the Classic community closely to help determine what the next steps will be after Classic, after Naxxramas, like what comes next. That's interesting to me. It initially sounded like they wanted to treat Classic WoW like a museum, but it looks like if Classic WoW is successful, they want to expand upon it. They don't just want to leave it in a museum state, they want to grow upon it, which is an interesting mentality. That means almost like they're accepting the fact that Classic WoW and the way the game is back then maybe is in a better state than the current game, enough that they should grow from there more than BFA. Maybe they plan to just separate the two games completely. It's a little bit of a reset button for them, kind of like Classic WoW, the ground zero of the MMORPG, is a good starting point to go back to now that BFA is not doing so good. Maybe from there they start to accept that they made some mistakes and they try to recreate a new version of the game without making those same mistakes if they go in a direction different than TBC. But if they just follow along the TBC path, they're basically just saying, we didn't make any mistakes, let's just do it all over again, sort of thing. So I'm very interested to see how they will react to this and how the community is going to react. If the community thinks that Blizzard didn't make mistakes along the road and they just accept the path and just want to explore it all over again fresh, like going back in the past, or if the community at large does think that Blizzard made a huge mistake somewhere along the line between vanilla and BFA, and that they do need to branch off that path and keep growing in another direction rather than keeping Classic as a museum, using it as sort of a way to pave a new path for the MMO genre, which I kind of hope they do. I hope not just Blizzard, but other MMO developers take a look at Classic WoW and say, all right, we fucked up somewhere, let's go back here and let's build off of where it was working, sort of thing. It'll be interesting to see if the community reacts like this. Maybe there's a lot of BFA players who come to Classic and just want to enjoy the ride that gets them back to BFA. I hope not. There's just way too much wrong with BFA. I think that there's no fixing it. I mean, some people like it, but not for the reasons of it being an MMO. Maybe like the story or some shit. I don't know. Me personally, I haven't even bought BFA. I don't plan to. But let's move on to the next question, because this one's a doozy. Layering and population. So this question is a huge answer here. I recommend you read it yourself. I'm just going to go over the tidbits. So if you guys were watching my stream during the stress test, you would have heard me expressing some frustrations. I was trying to group with some allies and I couldn't get in their layer and things. It seemed really wonky and jonky. There were a lot of posts on Reddit complaining that they were just getting layered all over the place or the layers felt too small. Ever since they announced layering and they started introducing it into the stress tests, in the closed beta and things like that, they haven't really given us any concrete information about how the layering was working, like what was going on. People saw what it was doing, they saw the bugs, but nobody really got a concrete answer about what was going on. This here is basically a very, very nice summary. It's very reassuring actually for me. Makes me feel a lot better about layering. They're basically saying that most of what we saw was just because of testing. The empty capital cities on the last stress test were just because they stopped collapsing the layers. They're saying that the layers are going to be much higher in the first few days just because it's a huge stress on the server having so many people in places like Northshire Abbey or Valley of Trials, and that once the players spread out we'll get a lot more less layers and things like that. And they're definitely planning to condense the layers down by the end of phase 2. They mentioned that there is a delay for swapping layers. It is related to looting and combat, and they said that the delay was a little bit too long and they're turning it down a notch, which is great. That was the issue I was having trying to join my party member. They mentioned that going through major cities triggers the delay to remove right away, which explains what some players were experiencing when they went through the city. They say that randomly swapping layers isn't supposed to be happening. That's a bug. They think they fixed it, which is great. I hope they fixed it. I mean, that shit is really annoying and stupid, and it's really immersion breaking to just whoop whoop whoop, random people disappearing and reappearing around you. And then they mentioned that PvP imposes a longer delay between layer swaps. So if you're getting ganked, you can't just join a group and get swapped into a new layer. You'll be stuck in that lair a bit longer if you were engaged in PvP combat. This could kind of promote a little bit of griefing if you're trying to join a party member and some rogue won't stop sapping you or something, so you're permanently phased into a different layer and you can't get to your party members. But that's classic WoW, right? That's PvP, that's what happens. And good to hear that they're planning to remove it as planned as soon as possible. Yeah, this honestly settled a lot of concerns I had with layering. Hopefully everything they say here is true. It's a little nerve-wracking to have to trust Blizzard on such a game-impacting feature that we haven't really seen functioning properly yet. They're promising that it's fixed here, but after all the stress tests and closed beta, not one of them has presented the layering in a proper working state. And now all that's left is launch, and we're just kind of going in blind, so hopefully they really got their shit down, but we'll see. Phase 2 overpopulation, they talk about. This is a big issue a lot of people are concerned about as they've been continuously opening new PvP servers. The moment they released the amount of PvP servers, everybody was kind of like, Blizzard, what are you doing? That's not enough servers. Now they're adding more and people are starting to get more relaxed, but a lot of people already settled into their comfy little homes. And some people don't want to leave their servers. Like, they don't want to leave. Ahn'Qiraj and Shazra, I believe, are the two big ones. They talk a bit about here in the next few questions, layer populations caps. They don't want to mention that. Free realm transfers, probably something that's going to end up happening. It did happen in the original vanilla WoW. I remember my character was able to freely transfer off of one of the higher populated realms to a lower pop realm. Worked out great for us. Our entire guild did it. I expect something like that's gonna happen if people stay stubborn and don't want to move off their servers because they're expecting everybody else to move. That's usually not what happens. It ends up with really huge queues, which sucks, and it's not worth it. Every server is gonna get its own community, guys, so I would suggest if you are planning to play on one of these super high pop servers, ask yourself if it's really worth it. It's just gonna ruin your gameplay having to sit in queue for like 6-8 hours a night just to get in. It's gonna suck. Paid character transfers is a thing they are considering, so I wouldn't be surprised if they eventually add that. I think this is all just to address the issue of people not wanting to get stuck on dead servers or servers where they don't have any friends to play with. At the same time though, it works a bit against realm identity. If people are swapping realms all the time, you don't feel so attached to your server and the people living on it. I won't say I like it, but I understand why it exists. No character boosts is the next question. Yeah, of course not. They said they weren't going to do that shit. They better not do that shit. Other character services, they don't need that. Appearance change or fucking faction change. Nobody wants that. They better not add that. Next, they're talking about the gates at AQ. Nothing special here. They're saying gates at AQ are going to function exactly as they were originally. That means there's going to be resources for the war effort, and then there's going to be the big gate opening and the big quest chain, which is awesome. A lot of people are looking forward to that. The bigger awesome part of this is that the technology is much better now than it was before. If you experienced the AQ40 gate in original vanilla, it was just a huge lag fest. There was like thousands of players condensed into Silithus, PvP battles going on between Horde and Alliance, huge monsters running around, but it was just so laggy you couldn't really experience to the fullest. So I'm curious how much better and how much fun it's going to be to experience the AQ40 gate opening event on a server that's super stable and can handle those thousands of players there. It should be really interesting. Maybe we get some insane epic PvP battles though, based on what we saw on Asmongold's stream where he was like bum rushing Stormwind. Probably still be laggy, but we'll have to see. They mentioned here and talk a bit about hunters, about how hunters were very difficult to recreate because they are such a unique class compared to the other classes. But they address specifically here with spell batching. So we got a few YouTube videos from Perplexity showing rogues running through Blizzard and not getting hit by ticks, or running over traps and not triggering them. Everybody was blaming this on spell batching, but according to the Q&A here, it says this is actually not related to spell batching. It's from a heartbeat update. If the target moves through the AoEs between the two heartbeat updates, they will not notice the target. This was how it originally was in 1.112. You could run through these area effects. Now, I do specifically remember being able to run through some of these effects. This is not something that surprises me that much. Still, it does seem a little broken, and it will affect mages who are AoE grinding, because it means that if they don't time their blizzards correctly, it could be that mobs just run through their blizzard. They just get through the heartbeat update, and there's really nothing the mages can do about it. This could be a very big nerf to spell cleave dungeon grinding groups and mages who plan to AoE in the open world. A couple of mobs being stragglers loose running out from the pack can cause a lot of trouble for a mage AoE group with a bunch of squishy guys trying to kite elites. We'll have to see if multiple mages can combat this in dungeons, if 2 or 3 blizzards is enough to get through these heartbeat updates and stop the mobs from running through the blizzards. All I have to say is thank God I'm playing a warrior and I don't have to worry about that shit. Next, they address something that I brought up in my 10 classic WoW clever uses game mechanics, and I'm honestly very glad that it is the way they address it here. Now, in my video, I mentioned that a common tactic on private servers is to lockout split, where 40 people go into Ahn'Qiraz's lair, they bring her down to like 1% HP, then like 35 of those people Hearthstone out of Ahn'Qiraz's lair, so you're left with 5 people to kill Ahn'Qiraj, finish her off, and then only those 5 people are locked at the dungeon and can take her loot. But as they say here, that is not possible. They say that everybody who is in combat with Ahn'Qiraj gets locked to the ID. Honestly, I am okay with this. I hate lockout splitting, I hate split raids, I hate alt raids, I hate all that shit. It's one of the big turnoffs for me for high-end raiding nowadays. When I see the top-end BFA method raiders running like 20 alt raids, a plate raid, a cloth raid, a leather raid, that shit is just so freaking redundant and boring, and the moment I see that that's what you have to do to be a top-end raider, like, who is having fun doing that? I don't think anybody enjoys that shit. So I'm glad they kind of prevent it somewhat here. Obviously, it's still possible to do alt split raids. You can have 20 alts with 20 mains and then give all the loot to the mains for MC and Ahn'Qiraj. So people trying to get their Sulphurous ingots and people trying to get their Thunder Fairy bindings. Probably something that's still going to happen, but because of the time it takes to get 60s in Classic WoW, I don't think it's going to be too impactful. And given that the gear dependence is not super duper high up until next Rammus, I don't think this is going to be a very big determining factor for endgame progression. Obviously, it is going to have a factor, and the more hardcore guilds are still going to do these alt split raids, like 6 alt raids, shit like that, but I'm glad I'm not feeling as forced to participate in that sort of raid culture per guild. I think that's stupid, it's not fun gameplay, and I hate that it's even a thing in the first place. Leash in Kha'Zix, yes, Kha'Zix had a hard leash in 1.12, they're not going to reverse that, but you can still fuck around with the green dragons, which were great. You can kite the one from Ashenvale to Orgrimmar, kite the one from Duskwood to Stormwind. The green dragons can cause a lot more damage than Kha'Zix. I think there's one that puts mushrooms all over the places, they're exploding, it's just chaotic. I freaking love it. It's a great way to just cause chaos and really engage people in the world. Now, world buffs. This is another interesting question that a lot of people have been concerned about. Some people, I think there was a video talking about how it could be an exploit. The world buffs are going to function exactly as they did in 1.12, which is to say they will remain available and not be restricted when entering new phases and such and such. Now, the interesting part here is Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer will have a cooldown. You will need to wait for the current Ahn'Qiraj and the Nefarian head to despawn before being able to regain the buff for a new turn-in. Now, the respawn or the despawn rate of these heads is interesting. It could be 2 hours, it could be 8 hours. That means that controlling this buff for certain guild groups is going to be more difficult. You can't control everybody on the server and say, hey, nobody turn in your Ahn'Qiraj head yet. Our guild's got to start a raid in 45 minutes. What will actually end up most likely happening is the hardcore guilds are going to get their Ahn'Qiraj buff whenever it pops off, and when they get that buff on their main, they're just going to log out and wait for the raid time. Because you don't have so much control about when other guilds are turning into dragon heads, it's probably going to make the hardcore speedrunners just log out when they get the buff. Or maybe guilds start forming coalitions to organize when they get the buff for their guildmates and the other people. Most likely doing things like in the middle of the night, everybody log in their mains, we'll get the dragon buff, we'll log out. And then the next day when reset comes and the new dungeon reset happens, we can all go in with our dragon buff, something like that. So not hugely impacting gameplay. The min-maxers are still going to min-max. So those of you who saw this and thinking, yeah, take that private server min-maxers, you can't get your world buffs now. Nah, they're still gonna get it. they're tryhards, they'll find a way. They always find a way. Now, some changes here. This is a little bit of a joke. A lot of people were talking about the fact that skeletons disappear too often. In Classic or Vanilla, you typically would see tons of skeletons around the Fargo Deep Mine or wherever it is that a lot of players die, usually like Hogger or some shit. They address this and say this is intentional. They don't want the corpses and skeletons to linger because they're worried about gold sellers and other people using those corpses to spell negative messages and a hate speech. Which, I get it, some people did do that, but it wasn't that common. I don't think it's common enough to warrant this sort of heavy-handed action. I think the skeletons add a level of immersion and give you a bigger sense of when PvP battles have taken place. In rare cases where people do start using their corpses to spell things, you can just ban them. I mean, it's a subscription-based game. People are paying for their accounts So if you ban them, they're going to have a hard time paying for a new one. It's not like a free-to-play game where everybody just spams free-to-play accounts and lays out corpses that say, up yours, things like that. So I think this is just a heavy-handed approach. It's not necessary. I really wish they would keep the skeletons in. It's really cool to see thousands of skeletons outside of BRD. I don't think that this change is needed. So I'm against this, but I don't think anybody cares what I think at this point in Blizzard HQ. They're like, who the fuck is Ahn'Qiraj? Fuck him, skeletons are out. So this next part is basically saying how we're going to get into the game at launch day. So you just log in by sitting at your character screen, and eventually the enter world button is supposed to light up. Cool, good to know. Everybody can prepare for that now and just jump right into the game as soon as it's available. The queue times are threatening Ahn'Qiraj and Shazra. This is something they've already talked about. They're trying to already encourage people to move their characters off of those servers by telling us what the estimated queue times are, several hours or more in certain instances. So if you hate queue times, you should... They're shoving it in your face. They're not hinting at it. They're shoving it in your face. They're saying, if you play on Ahn'Qiraj and Shazra, you're gonna get queue times. So if you don't move off of them, you have no right to complain about queue times, basically. It's your fault at this point. Blizzard has given everybody plenty of warning that these servers are gonna have big population issues. And basically the next few questions are just going over the same thing. How they're gonna deal with more queue times. They have emergency servers on standby if the population spike, which I think they're underestimating the population even now. I know there's a lot of people who have not subbed to WoW early because they're really cheapskates and they haven't gone in for the name reservation thing, and they're planning to resub at the last minute. So I think the population of Classic WoW is going to be much higher than it is, and I expect a lot of emergency realms to be popping up very quickly. I don't think we're going to get a lot of queue times at the launch just because of how they're using layering to prevent queue times. I think the queue times aren't going to be a major issue until we start getting past phase 1 or when they start taking layers out. It's good to hear that it seems like they're prepared. The last stress test, the login was a little iffy at the start. Everybody got hit into queues. We ended up getting in 15 minutes later than the first people, so we were a bit behind in level, but it honestly wasn't that bad compared to the previous stress test. So it seems like they improved their technology and their hardware a lot from the first stress test to the last stress test. So even if you get stuck in a queue for maybe 10 minutes at the start if you're unlucky, I don't think it's going to be that bad, considering that it looks like everybody's going to be able to already be logged in on the server, and all you have to do is press the enter world button. It looks like everybody's already going to be past the login queue boss when the servers go up, so it's all about that loading screen. And whew, you better be on an SSD if you're looking to level fast. Oh man, I'm getting nervous just thinking about this, just reading this login section. All right. Has the reception of Classic met or exceeded your expectations? They've been blown away by it, guys. They thought we did, but we didn't, or something like that. I mean, everybody knows the Classic WoW is going to be big. There's tons of people who are saying they didn't want to play it, but now it's coming up closer and suddenly everybody's really interested. They're saying it's a 15-year-old game. It's going to be boring. You're going to play it. It's going to be too grindy. Nobody wants to go through that again. And then like the next month, they're like, fucking Classic WoW, let's go, baby. It's a big turnaround happening. I've seen it happen with a lot of my friends, a lot of my old guildies. I was a little bit depressed initially. I was like, who am I going to play Classic with? Nobody wants to play Classic anymore. None of my old friends. I asked them all. They're like, nah, you know, I'm a little busy. But now that the game's about to come out, they're suddenly like, hey, Ahn'Qiraj, where are you playing? What server are you on? Let's go, let's go. So it was really exciting. Looking forward to seeing everybody who comes back, who didn't think they were coming back. I think the hype of Classic is definitely building, even though there's not that much heavy advertising going on for Classic WoW. But yeah, it looks like the rest of the questions here are pretty minor. They're just addressing some Easter eggs that they found in the code. But aside from that, there's a really great AMA. I think they answered a lot of major questions. The biggest question I saw on that list that I'm glad they addressed was layering. I think a lot of people were having issues with that. Also happy to hear how the login is working and the 10-man dungeons and the Ahn'Qiraj reset. Really interesting information. Thorium Point also big. But yeah, that's the AMA. You guys can check it out yourselves if there's anything you want to nitpick at. In the description section below, I'll put a link to it. And let me know in the comment section below if any of these answers surprised you guys, or if there's anything that you're very happy to hear about personally. But yeah, that's it for me. I'm going to stop here for this video. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys next time. I am booping out.